Miss Anderson, a young substitute teacher, walked into the dimly lit old classroom. The flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over the rows of desks. The previous teacher had mysteriously left, and whispers among the students hinted at something sinister. Determined to make a good impression, Miss Anderson ignored the unsettling atmosphere and prepared for her first class. As Miss Anderson began the lesson, she noticed the students whispering and glancing nervously at the empty teacher's desk. Their behavior was strange, and the atmosphere in the classroom was tense. She asked if everything was all right, but the students avoided her gaze and mumbled vague reassurances. The unease in the room was palpable, and Miss Anderson couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Throughout the day, unexplained events occurred. Books fell off shelves without warning, the lights flickered violently, and cold drafts swept through the classroom. Miss Anderson tried to maintain control, but the students' fear was contagious. She felt an oppressive presence in the room, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. The classroom, once a place of learning, now felt like a trap. During a quiet moment, Miss Anderson saw a shadowy figure out of the corner of her eye. It moved swiftly across the room, disappearing before she could fully register it. The students gasped, their fear evident. Miss Anderson tried to calm them, but her own fear was growing. The figure seemed to be haunting the classroom, its presence becoming more pronounced with each passing hour. Desperate for answers, Miss Anderson searched the teacher's desk and found an old, dusty journal. It was filled with accounts of similar hauntings written by previous teachers. The journal detailed strange occurrences, ghostly sightings, and the sense of impending doom that hung over the classroom. Miss Anderson realized that the classroom had a dark history, and she was not the first to experience its terror. As she read further, Miss Anderson discovered a tragic event involving a student's death years ago. The student had died under mysterious circumstances, and their spirit was rumored to haunt the classroom. The pages of the journal were stained and torn, as if someone had tried to erase the memories of that fateful day. The more she read, the more she understood that the spirit's unrest was the source of the haunting. The ghostly figure grew more aggressive, causing chaos in the classroom. Objects flew off the desks, glass shattered, and the whispers grew louder and more menacing. Miss Anderson knew she had to find a way to appease the spirit or risk further harm. She remembered the journal's accounts and decided to use them to communicate with the spirit. Using the clues from the journal, Miss Anderson gathered items for a makeshift ritual: candles, salt, and an old photograph of the deceased student she found in the desk. Her hands shook with fear and determination as she set up the ritual in the center of the classroom. The air around her grew colder, and the ghostly figure watched her every move, its presence more oppressive than ever. As Miss Anderson performed the ritual, the ghostly figure attacked. Desks toppled, books flew through the air, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. Miss Anderson fought to complete the ritual, her voice rising above the chaos. She could feel the spirit's anger, but also a flicker of hope. She knew she was close to breaking the curse and freeing the spirit. With one final chant, the spirit was banished in a flash of blinding light. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the classroom returned to its peaceful state. Miss Anderson collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The ghostly figure was gone, and the curse that had haunted the classroom for years was finally broken. As dawn broke, Miss Anderson stood outside the school, watching the first light of day break over the horizon. The night's terror felt like a distant memory, replaced by a sense of peace and triumph. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The classroom, once a place of fear, now felt like a place of new beginnings. Miss Anderson knew she would never forget that night, but she also knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. It was a typical day at Crestwood High School until an unexpected announcement crackled over the PA system, declaring an immediate lockdown. Ms. Harper, the history teacher, and her students looked puzzled and concerned. The classroom door locked automatically and the lights dimmed. The students exchanged nervous glances as an uneasy silence settled over the room. As the minutes ticked by, the classroom grew darker and shadows crept into the corners. The students whispered in fear, their anxiety palpable. Ms. Harper tried to maintain calm, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She checked the windows and doors, but there was no sign of any threat outside. The unease grew as strange noises began to echo through the halls. Suddenly the desks began to shake, books fell off the shelves, and the lights flickered ominously. The students screamed, and Miss Harper tried to keep them calm, but the fear was overwhelming. It felt as if the classroom itself was alive, reacting to an unseen force. The air grew cold, and a sense of dread filled the room. Ms. Harper knew they were not alone. Messages began to appear on the chalkboard, written in a strange, ghostly script. "You cannot leave," it said, followed by, "I am watching." The students huddled together, their fear intensifying with each word. Ms. Harper tried to erase the messages, but they reappeared almost instantly. It was clear that a malevolent presence was toying with them. Desperate for answers, Ms. Harper searched through the desk drawers and found an old, dusty school yearbook. It was filled with eerie photographs and notes about a tragic event that had occurred years ago. A student named Emily had mysteriously disappeared, and her spirit was rumored to haunt the school. The yearbook's pages were stained and torn, as if someone had tried to erase the memories of that fateful year. The ghostly figure of a young girl appeared in the classroom, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. The students screamed and backed away, but Miss Harper stood her ground. She realized that the spirit was Emily, the missing student. Emily's presence was both tragic and terrifying, and Miss Harper knew they had to find a way to communicate with her to understand what she wanted. Miss Harper and a few brave students set up a makeshift séance with candles and a Ouija board found in the storage closet. Their hands shook with fear as they began to communicate with Emily's spirit. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out messages from the beyond. Emily's spirit revealed that she was trapped in the school and needed their help to find peace. Emily's spirit grew more aggressive, filling the classroom with chaos. Objects flew through the air, windows shattered, and the lights flickered violently. Ms. Harper and the students fought to maintain control, their voices rising above the chaos. They pleaded with Emily, promising to help her find peace. The spirit's anger reached a peak, and the room shook with an otherworldly force. With one final plea, Emily's spirit began to calm. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the classroom returned to its normal state. Emily's ghostly figure smiled sadly before fading away, her spirit finally finding peace. Miss Harper and the students breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that they had helped Emily move on from her tragic past. As dawn broke, the students and Miss Harper stood outside the school, watching the first light of day break over the horizon. The night's terror felt like a distant memory, replaced by a sense of peace and triumph. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The school, once a place of fear, now felt like a place of new beginnings. Miss Harper and her students knew they would never forget that night, but they also knew they had the strength to face whatever came next. It was a gloomy Monday morning at Crestwood High School when a new substitute teacher, Mr. Thompson, walked in. The hallways were filled with whispers and curious glances. Mr. Thompson had an air of mystery about him, with his old-fashioned attire and piercing gaze. The students in Mrs. Hargrove's history class were eager to see what this strange new teacher was like. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the classroom, his cold eyes scanning the room. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, feeling a strange chill in the air. He introduced himself in a monotone voice and began the lesson without any small talk. There was something unsettling about him, and the students could sense it. During the lesson, a student named Emily raised her hand to ask a question. As she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was silenced as if by an unseen force. She gasped for air, her eyes wide with fear. The other students watched in horror as Mr. Thompson continued teaching, seemingly oblivious to Emily's distress. When she finally regained her breath, she remained silent for the rest of the class, too terrified to speak. Curiosity got the better of a group of students who decided to sneak into the classroom after hours. They rummaged through Mr. Thompson's desk and found strange symbols carved into the wood and old dusty books filled with ancient spells and rituals. The discovery sent chills down their spines. They knew there was something deeply wrong with their substitute teacher. That night, one of the students, Mark, had a terrifying nightmare. He saw Mr. Thompson in the center of a dark room, performing a sinister ritual. Ghostly figures surrounded him, their faces twisted in agony. Mark woke up in a cold sweat, realizing that his nightmare might be more than just a bad dream. He shared his vision with his friends, and they decided to confront Mr. Thompson. The next day, the students decided to confront Mr. Thompson. They stood up in the middle of the lesson and demanded answers. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense as Mr. Thompson's expression darkened. He revealed his true nature, admitting that he was a practitioner of dark magic and that he had chosen this class for his next ritual. Before the students could react, the classroom doors slammed shut and the windows sealed themselves. An ominous darkness enveloped the room, and the air grew cold. Mr. Thompson began chanting in an ancient language, and the students felt an invisible force holding them in place. They realized they were trapped and had to find a way to break free from his dark magic. Remembering the symbols and books they had found, the students decided to perform a counter-ritual. They worked together, their faces filled with determination and fear. As Mr. Thompson continued his dark incantations, the students recreated the symbols and began their own chant. The air crackled with energy as the two opposing forces clashed. The classroom became a battlefield of supernatural forces. Ghostly figures appeared, and bursts of energy filled the room. The students struggled to maintain their focus, but their collective willpower began to overpower Mr. Thompson's dark magic. The ghostly figures turned against him, their faces contorted with rage and betrayal. In a final, desperate effort, the ghostly figures turned on Mr. Thompson, consuming him in a swirl of supernatural energy. His screams echoed through the room as he was dragged into the darkness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the classroom returned to normal. The students collapsed in exhaustion, relieved that the nightmare was over. As dawn broke, the students stood outside the school, watching the first light of day break over the horizon. The night's terror felt like a distant memory, replaced by a sense of peace and triumph. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The school, once a place of fear, now felt like a place of new beginnings. The students knew they would never forget that night, but they also knew they had the strength to face whatever came next.